Most women, if they could peer into the soul of a man like Marcus Aurelius, would not see what they expect. Not a man without emotion, but one who has walked through every flame and learned not to scream. They would not find coldness behind those calm eyes, but a roaring silence, the kind that only exists after surviving inner war. Imagine this: a man born into empire, cloaked in power before he could walk, trained in philosophy before he could taste rebellion. A boy who was never permitted to break, because even his weakness had to appear noble. Behind the golden statues and marbled halls, he was not shielded from the world's brutality. He absorbed it, and it did not harden him, it hollowed him. But in the hollow, he carved space for wisdom. You see, the world has always misunderstood stillness. They confuse it for apathy. They cannot grasp that a man might feel everything so deeply, he must tame it into silence or risk being consumed. What you read as calm is often the last defense of a soul who has made peace with despair and chose not to pass it on. Marcus Aurelius learned early that the role of emperor was not to indulge the ego, but to break it, piece by piece. Power, to him, was not indulgence, it was restraint. To be constantly reminded that nothing external, not praise, not love, not even the crown on his head, could be truly possessed. That everything he loved would be taken, that even Rome itself would decay. And in this, he did not despair. He wrote. His meditations were never meant to be published. They were letters to the shadow, writings scrawled in the loneliness of command, each line a whispered invocation to stay awake, to not lose himself to flattery, to not fall asleep in the arms of comfort. That's what most never understand. True Stoicism is not the denial of pain. It is the discipline of not worshiping it. And you who are watching, you may already sense that you are not as different from him as time would have you believe. How many times have you been praised for being strong when inside you were crumbling beneath the pressure of expectations no one even named aloud? How many days have you endured in silence, wearing peace like armor, hoping no one would see the war behind your gaze? Strength like his is not born, it is bled into being. Every disappointment, a chisel. Every betrayal, a forge. Marcus did not arrive at Stoicism. He limped toward it, bruised by the very humanity he sought to transcend. And as he ruled, as he buried children, as he stood beside a wife whose love was more politically aligned than emotionally present, he wrote not as a philosopher, but as a man begging his soul not to harden. Even now, through the pages of centuries, you can feel it, the ache between his words. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. Not morbid, not cold, just a man who had seen enough loss to understand. Urgency is the heartbeat of purpose. So many men live as shadows of themselves, disconnected, reactive, emotionally stunted by a world that rewards numbness and punishes introspection. But Marcus, he dared to feel through the numbness, not to react, but to respond, not to dominate, but to understand. He lived in a paradox, the most powerful man in the world, spending his nights reminding himself not to crave control. What he hides behind those calm eyes is not repression, but integration. He confronted the chaos within until it bowed, not by force, but by presence. That is the secret. He sat with discomfort long enough to know its voice. He befriended uncertainty until it stopped threatening him, and he bore the weight of his emotions without handing them to someone else. Ask yourself this: what do you hide behind your composure? Is it peace? Or is it fear of falling apart? Is it wisdom? Or the shame of never having been seen? The calm exterior means nothing if the storm inside is denied. But when a man, like Marcus, looks out upon the world and no longer seeks to own it, but only to understand it, then the calm is real. Then the silence is holy. There is a moment in every thinking man's life when he stands at the edge of his own illusion, when the carefully constructed image he has worn, like a second skin, begins to crack under the weight of truth. Marcus Aurelius lived most of his years on that precipice, not because he was unsure of who he was, but because he knew how easily a man could become enslaved to who the world needed him to be. And yet he never flinched. His power was not in his dominion over Rome, but in his refusal to let that dominion define him. A lesser man would have adorned himself in the mythology of greatness. Marcus stripped himself of it. He refused to believe the lie that his identity was tied to status, pleasure, or recognition. And in that refusal, he stepped into a freedom most men will never taste. But that kind of freedom doesn't come without pain. You pay for it in the currency of ego death. For to know your worth apart from what others see, to walk through life aware that no amount of glory will make you more whole, is to lose the narcotic comfort of being admired. Marcus knew this. That is why, night after night, he returned to the page, each word a quiet rebellion against the seductive pull of power, each meditation a tether to something deeper, something eternal. And though his quill moved in the language of Stoic discipline, his soul wept in private corners. For all men who have seen too much eventually become haunted by tenderness. In our time, his kind would be called emotionally unavailable. But this is a misreading. He was not inaccessible. He was guarded, not because he lacked the capacity to love, but because he had buried too many pieces of himself to hand them over lightly. The man who has seen what life does to the unprotected learns to wrap his emotions in silence, not to deceive, but to preserve. You've met this kind of man before. Maybe in the eyes of a father who never said, "I love you," but worked himself into the grave to keep food on the table. Or the lover who never wept in front of you, but broke in solitude after every argument. He does not reveal easily, not because he feels less, but because what he feels would drown you if he unleashed it without care. This is the man Marcus was, not just a philosopher king, but a man who had tasted every flavor of grief and chose to keep walking. Do you understand what kind of courage that takes? Not the courage to fight external wars, but to turn inward again and again, even when nothing has changed. To face the same demons every morning, knowing they may never fully vanish, and still speak gently to the soul. The shadow does not scare a man like him. He is the shadow. He has seen himself capable of envy, of lust, of cruelty. He does not pretend otherwise. But he refuses to be ruled by these fragments. And so, rather than deny them, he integrates them, makes room for them at the table, but never hands them the throne. That is what separates him from the reactive man. The reactive man lashes out, clings, seeks constant validation. He cannot sit with discomfort. He must project it. But Marcus, he lets discomfort teach him, and in that, he becomes sovereign. Ask yourself, how often do you react from fear disguised as strength? How often do you mistake avoidance for peace? True power, the kind that Marcus Aurelius embodied, is found in stillness that does not collapse under pressure, in restraint that is not repression, but mastery. And mastery, for him, was not about dominance over others. It was about alignment with his deepest values, even when they cost him. Even when Rome crumbled, even when friends betrayed, even when love turned cold, he remained rooted. And if you think that made him emotionally distant, think again. It made him emotionally capable. Only a man who is unshaken by his own emptiness can hold space for the chaos of others. Only a man who has touched his own grief without needing to be saved can love without possession. Only a man who has tasted his own insignificance can lead without pride. And that is why his gaze unnerves you, because behind it is a man who has nothing left to prove, a man who no longer needs the world to mirror his worth back to him. A man who has burned in every fire and come out with nothing but ashes, and from those ashes built stillness. There is a kind of man whose presence doesn't shout, doesn't demand. He walks into a room and says nothing, yet something inside you shifts, not because he is performing strength, but because he has nothing left to perform. Marcus Aurelius was that man, the kind who radiates not dominance, but gravity, a silent force born of self-possession. To understand him, you must abandon the modern obsession with noise. Marcus did not win with charisma. He did not seduce with charm. He did not manipulate the emotions of others to serve his image. What drew others to him, even those who envied him, was his refusal to abandon himself in the presence of power. And that, more than any speech or sword, made him unshakable. Still, his strength was hard-earned. This was not the natural calm of the untouched. It was the tempered composure of a man who had walked through fire and refused to let the flames deform him. A man who had known the high of imperial praise and the low of unbearable loss. Marcus buried 8 children. Do you understand what that does to a man? It either breaks him or breaks him open. He was broken open. Each loss peeled another layer of illusion away. Each death reminded him that even the blood of gods cannot shield you from impermanence. And so he wept, not publicly. For an emperor's tears are weapons in the wrong hands, but privately, in the quiet sanctum of thought. Not from weakness, but because he allowed reality to shape him, rather than hide from it. He didn't retreat into bitterness. He didn't curse the gods. He looked at suffering and asked not why it came, but who he must become in its presence. That is a rare kind of masculinity, not the brittle masculinity of ego and entitlement, but the sacred masculinity of inner governance. The kind that holds contradiction without collapse. The kind that bleeds dignity into every word, even when no one is listening. What do you do when no one is watching? That was the question Marcus lived. That was the mirror he faced each night. You too have such a mirror, though you may avoid it. It lives in the moments when you say yes to what you know is beneath you, when you chase applause instead of alignment, when you seek to be understood by those who cannot even hear themselves. Marcus turned away from the crowd long before his body ever left it. He ruled with detachment, not apathy, because he had tasted how fleeting admiration truly is. One day you are a savior, the next a villain. He knew that the opinion of the mob was a wind, and no wind was ever worthy of steering a man's soul, and so he listened inward, to the voice that is not reactive, not panicked, not performative, but steady, sacred. The voice that whispers, "This is not who you are. Return." He returned again and again, from rage, from doubt, from ego. Each time, he chose the inner citadel over the outer noise. He did not indulge his shadow, but he did not exile it either. He turned toward it with unflinching clarity, and in doing so, transformed it from enemy to teacher. You may not wear a crown, you may not sit atop an empire, but you too hold a kingdom within, and you too must learn to rule it or be ruled by it. The difference is everything. Marcus Aurelius did not deny temptation. He did not pretend he was immune to lust, pride, or vengeance. He simply refused to obey them, because he knew that to indulge them would be to betray his deeper self. And that betrayal, the quiet self-abandonment of a man who knows better, is the most unbearable kind. You know the feeling, the sting of saying what you don't believe just to be liked, the shame of lowering your standard just to be wanted, the sickening weight of wearing a mask for too long until even you forget what's underneath. Marcus dropped the mask, not because he didn't need it, but because he couldn't breathe beneath it anymore. And maybe, somewhere inside, you're gasping too. Maybe the calm you wear isn't peace, but performance. Maybe you've confused control with strength, detachment with wisdom, numbness with resilience, but you don't have to stay there. You can choose, like he did, to begin the long walk back to your center, to the place where you no longer need to be impressive, to be whole, where you no longer chase certainty, but stand calmly inside the unknown, where your power is not in being untouchable, but in being real. He was not born this way. Do not make the mistake of imagining Marcus Aurelius as some distant marble god, untouched by the human messiness that stains us all. He bled, just as you do. He raged, hungered, failed. He was not beyond jealousy, not immune to despair. He was not sculpted into a monument by destiny. He was carved from chaos by discipline. And that is the part most overlooked, because it is easier to worship a statue than to walk the path that statue once walked. Easier to quote his wisdom than to live by it. But he did not write his meditations for the world to admire. He wrote them to survive himself. To remind the trembling boy inside the emperor that no title could redeem him from self-betrayal. There are entries where you can feel his weariness drip through the page. At every hour, give your full concentration, as if you were about to depart from life. This is not the advice of a man consumed with power. This is the plea of a man afraid of wasting what little time he had, left pretending to be something he wasn't. Do you know what it feels like to perform strength every day? To wear calm as a mask, not a truth? To walk through your life praised for your composure, while inside, your soul screams for someone to see the storm beneath? Marcus did. He bore the unbearable, not just because he was emperor, but because there was no other choice. To fall apart publicly would risk the empire, but even more, it would risk himself. For he knew that when a man lies to the world, he fractures his image. But when he lies to himself, he fractures his soul. So, he chose truth. Again and again, brutal, unforgiving, beautiful truth. He did not indulge in the romance of helplessness. He did not cloak his traumas in poetry. He stared straight into his own capacity for destruction and said, "You do not rule me. You, yes, you, who have been carrying the wounds of men who never face themselves. You know what it means to live in the aftermath of unclaimed shadow. You've seen what happens when men cling to the mask of logic to avoid the truth of their pain. When intellect becomes armor and detachment becomes a prison. But this man, Marcus, he used intellect as a scalpel, not a shield. He dissected his fear. He confronted his shame. He did not run from the parts of himself that were still tender, still afraid. Instead, He wrote them down, not to expose them, but to transform them. What if your greatest strength is not in how well you hide your wounds, but in how bravely you face them? What if the calm you envy in others was not gifted, but earned, drop by drop, through a lifetime of showing up, especially when it hurt? This was the secret behind his eyes. Not numbness, not detachment, but earned serenity. The kind that only comes from sitting alone in the dark and refusing to abandon yourself there. His reign was not defined by conquest, but by the invisible victories no statue could capture. The decision not to retaliate when he was betrayed. The choice to grieve his children without cursing fate. The quiet commitment to meet every moment with presence, even when his heart ached for escape, because that's where real power lives, not in the throne, but in the space between reaction and response. In the moment you want to lash out, but choose to pause. In the second you want to run, but choose to remain. In the breath between impulse and wisdom. And yet, it cost him. Do not romanticize it. His life was not easy. His self-mastery did not make him invulnerable. It made him responsible. For everything, for everyone. And in that weight, he found a kind of meaning, too deep for language. Because what Marcus knew, and what you may be starting to feel, is that pain does not break you. It refines you, if you let it. If you stop blaming the world, stop resisting what is, and turn inward with the terrifying honesty of a man who has nothing left to lose but illusion. There is no freedom greater than self-possession, and no prison more suffocating than a man at war with his own nature. So let this be your invitation, not to become stoic in name, but in being, not to mimic his calm, but to earn your own, not to chase peace through avoidance, but to find it by walking straight through the fire of your truth. The man who emerges from that fire does not need to be seen. He sees himself. He loved in silence, not because he lacked passion, but because he understood the sacred nature of devotion, untethered from performance. Marcus Aurelius loved with a kind of stillness that few today can comprehend, not the desperate, consuming kind that seeks to possess, but the anchored, unflinching kind that simply is, steady, unmoving, real. He did not shout his affections into the void. He showed them in the way he stayed, in the way he endured, in the way he never let the bitterness of disappointment sour his integrity. His marriage was not a fairy tale. It was political, strained, at times distant. But still, he returned to duty, not because he was blind, but because he knew that to love only when it is easy is to never love at all. This is what today's world often forgets, that strength in love is not the roar, but the restraint. Not in conquering others, but in ruling oneself. And no man ruled himself more completely than Marcus. He could have indulged in decadence. The empire offered it endlessly. He could have numbed himself in wine, women, pleasure, or power. He could have escaped into self-righteousness, into the lie that his suffering was unique. But he didn't. He stayed awake. And in staying awake, he walked the most difficult path of all, one that led directly through his own heart. Because the heart of a Stoic is not a closed chamber. It is a crucible. Inside it, every betrayal, every sorrow, every moment of disillusionment is refined into clarity. There is no denial. There is no suppression. There is only the quiet discipline of choosing not to weaponize pain, but to alchemize it. He knew something most men are too afraid to admit, that control is an illusion, that everything you grasp for, status, desire, even the loyalty of others, can slip through your fingers in a breath. And so, he stopped grasping. He let go, not in resignation, but in radical acceptance. That is why his stillness was so piercing, because it wasn't the calm of the untouched, it was the calm of the surrendered. This kind of surrender frightens many. It requires the death of entitlement, the death of the inner child screaming, "Why me?" The death of the persona that demands the world be fair. But Marcus did not live in fantasy. He lived in alignment with what is. That's why his serenity has survived the centuries, because it was rooted not in success, but in surrender to truth. Look around today, and you'll see the opposite. Men built on bravado, women seduced by chaos, people addicted to the high of being wanted, but terrified of being truly seen. Everyone chasing validation, afraid to sit still long enough to hear the emptiness inside echo back. But Marcus sat. He listened. Not just to the world, but to himself. And when he found darkness within, he did not turn away. He wrote it down. He met it. He integrated it. And that is what made him rare. Not his title, not his intellect, not even his resilience, but his refusal to fracture. In a world designed to split you into roles, identities, projections, he chose wholeness, even when it cost him ease, even when it left him misunderstood, even when it meant standing utterly alone in his truth. There is something deeply masculine, divinely masculine, in this stance. A man who no longer needs to control others because he governs himself. A man who is not afraid of silence because he has made peace with what speaks inside it. A man who does not seek to be worshipped because he knows who he is without being told. Ask yourself, have you met that part of you? The part that does not react, does not flinch, does not bargain to be loved. The part of you that is not wounded, not hungry, not posturing, but still, present, whole. Or have you confused noise with aliveness? Because the man who is truly alive does not need to prove it. Marcus Aurelius was that kind of man, the rare kind who could walk through death, disappointment, desire, and still emerge with an open hand and a steady gaze. He lost everything that the world calls valuable, and yet he never lost himself. He knew, as you now know, that true peace is not the absence of pain, it is the absence of need. In his final years, as his body waned and the empire trembled under the weight of war and plague, Marcus Aurelius did not seek comfort. He sought clarity. He could feel the end approaching, not with dread, but with precision. He had long since ceased fearing death, not because he was cold, but because he understood its nature. Death was not an intruder. It was a mirror, a revealer, the final test of whether a man had lived in accordance with what he claimed to believe. And Marcus had. You can sense it in his final writings, the quiet dissolving of all that no longer mattered. Reputation, achievement, even memory. He knew they would fade. He knew history would reshape him, polish him, distort him. But he also knew it didn't matter. The soul cannot be measured by legacy, only by alignment. He left no final speech to glorify himself, no grand monument inscribed with his virtues. He left behind a voice, quiet, steady, unwavering, speaking across the centuries to anyone with the ears to listen. It says, let go. Let go of what is not yours. Let go of who you are not. Let go of needing to be understood. Because the man who is at peace with himself no longer begs for peace from the world. And that is where the story returns. Not to Rome, not to the throne, not even to the man, but to you. Because you are not here for entertainment. Something deeper brought you to these words. Maybe it was the ache. Maybe the silence. Maybe the sense that you are wearing a life that no longer fits. Whatever it is asking you to remember. That power is not in control. It is in surrender. That strength is not in defense. It is in presence. That freedom is not in escape. It is in radical truth. The truth that you don't need to become anyone else. You only need to return to that quiet, unshaken center within you that does not need to be seen to exist. That does not disappear in rejection. That does not beg for love, because it is love. But you will not find it in noise. You will not find it in flattery. You will not find it in the arms of those who only touch the surface of you. You will find it in the places you've been avoiding, the wounds, the shame, the craving, the fragile hopes you've buried under years of performance, the forgotten self that still believes in something deeper than survival. Marcus found it there, and so can you. But you must be willing to lose everything you were taught to be. You must be willing to let the illusion die, because there comes a point, if you are brave, when silence is no longer threatening, but sacred. When solitude stops feeling like punishment and becomes devotion. When calm no longer hides something, it reveals something. The soul you abandoned to be accepted. The truth you silenced to be safe. The wholeness you traded for praise. He gave you the map, but you must walk it. Not to become him, but to become yourself. And when you do, when you return from the fire without bitterness, without begging, without masks, you will discover what he hid behind those calm eyes. Not perfection, not superiority, but freedom. And you will no longer seek to be chosen.